looks like we don't have Ms. Lattimore with us, but hopefully she will arrive shortly. As I said, welcome to the September meeting of Lawrence City Council. I will call us to order tonight, and we'll begin with an invocation, which was scheduled to be offered by Councilor Lattimore, but I will fill in for her and then lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So would you please stand? Dear Lord, we thank you for gathering us together as your people. We ask that you would give us wisdom to do your will and to provide and care for the people of this city. Open our hearts and our minds to your will so that your will would be conducted through us. Help all that we do to be pleasing in your sight, and may all that we do be glorifying to you. We ask all these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Sorry. It's tight quarters. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated.
Painful for them.
All righty. We have a very full agenda tonight, both in items on the agenda itself, and we have quite a number of announcements to make the public aware of. And so I want to begin tonight with bringing the community's attention to the fact that all across our nation, October is recognized as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This past weekend, it was my pleasure to take part in a Walk in Their Shoes walk that was hosted by our victims advocate, Amanda Veal, and the Lawrence Police Department at Lawrence Middle School, bring awareness to the problem of domestic violence. And so I told them what I will tell you here tonight, that it is my pleasure to proclaim October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the city of Lawrence. And I want to thank Ms. Amanda Veal and all those who came out and helped prepare that walk. I could see how much it meant to the victims of domestic violence who actually showed up and participated. And for all the folks that were there, we know that there are many others in our community who've experienced that. And we want to show that we're a city that cares about those people and shows that this is something that can't be tolerated and that we're committed to improving. So thank you, Amanda, and we appreciate having you here tonight. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to stand up and be recognized by the crowd. Amanda is our first full-time victims advocate for the city, so we're very proud to have her on board, and she's done tremendous work. I want to bring you some business news. We have heard reports that Starbucks is still coming to our community. They have moved forward with permitting that is required, and so that project is coming along. They're located on the site of Gwen's Windows and Siding along Highway 76, the former site. We also have permits that have been pulled by Presbyterian College for the Capitol Theater, and they are moving forward with that renovation. As for the construction of new housing communities throughout our city, we have several that are moving forward at pace. We have Ridge Haven, which will be located by the Ridge. They are still in the DHEC permitting process, but moving forward. Gibson Grove, which is slated to be built behind Bilo, the former Bilo site on West Main. They have begun pulling grading permits, and those have been issued already. And we expect, I understand, tomorrow for the permits that are, grading permits that are needed for Lawrence Station, which is along East Main, for those to be issued. As we build these new communities, each of those new communities will have broadband from the get-go. But we also recognize the need to expand broadband and fiber access across the city of Lawrence. So we're working with our community partners, the Commission of Public Works and PRTC, to install fiber all across the city. Not ready to make an announcement on that, but I will say that planning is moving forward with that, and we have some very promising prospects on the horizon. We understand from an economic development perspective how important having access to fiber broadband is, and so we're grateful for the partnerships that are working on that, and we look forward to working with them. We have received the remaining balance of our American Rescue Plan funds. Those funds have already funded a investment in technology infrastructure for the city that catches us up after decades of not really being able to fully fund the city's needs. But they will also pay for the expansion of the police department and our municipal courts. It will also provide a new chamber for City Hall, or for City Council, combined with that municipal courtroom. It will allow us, or has allowed us, to purchase a new 100-foot fire truck to replace one that was 34 years old. And we continue to make these significant improvements in our city in strategic ways, so that we're using one-time money on one-time projects that will put us in the best position going forward possible. One of the significant ongoing expenses that the city has each year is the amount that we spend on waste disposal and garbage. There was a fee that was established by City Council more than a decade ago for our residential trash collection service, and that put us in a position where we were essentially the customer service and billing department of a private company. So that although somebody else was picking up the trash, the city was sending out bills every month to the tune of thousands of dollars. And if they failed to do their job adequately, it was the city of Lawrence who got the complaints, and we just had to pass them along to somebody else. Fortunately, not every street in the city has suffered from bad service, but there's a whole lot that have. And we heard enough from members of our city council who had heard from their residents. We knew something had to be done, so we scheduled meetings with Waste Industries, later Green for Life, and unfortunately, they have continued to have the service quality issues that have been identified as needing improvement. And so we informed them that we were exercising our obligation not to renew the existing contract and would instead put a new contract out for bid. We did that by an open bidding process, putting that on SCIBO, the South Carolina Business Opportunities website, and allowed for contractors to bid on that project. We got numerous inquiries from companies about the details of the contract, and so there was interest and awareness of the contract, but ultimately it was a local company, Carolina Waste Management, who placed the bid on the contract and will soon provide service to the city of Lawrence beginning in March. With that transition will come a need for residents to transition from their current service to using Waste Industries, replacement of cans, etc. And so we're going to be working together with Waste Industries and Green for Life to make that transition as seamless as possible. So be on the lookout for literature concerning that. I was speaking with the city administrator this afternoon, and I think the plan is to send out a mailer to each resident who receives that service. Last month, we gave second and final reading to the Redevelopment Commission ordinance, which authorized the city to form a redevelopment commission, which would aid in the restoration and renewal of blighted neighborhoods across the city. And the first step in that process is to actually have it recognized by the state, and we have sent that paperwork to Columbia, and we're waiting to hear back from Columbia on the official establishment of that commission. Likewise, be on the lookout for a solicitation of interest to serve on that commission, because we want to make sure that is a community-led organization that truly reflects the needs of the community. It won't be sort of City Council 2.0. This will be something that is reflective of the community itself. We have a new substation along 221 that is being built by the Commission of Public Works. I'm happy to see one of the commissioners here with us tonight. We appreciate the partnership with CPW. It is my understanding that substation will have a particular dedicated service to Hunter Industrial Park, but may also be used for backup supply for the city. But it's a tremendous economic development incentive for us to be able to say that we have power that can adequately supply the businesses at Hunter Industrial Park and supply more to come. It will specifically supply power to Euro Pastry, which will soon take the place of Muffin Man. It will provide 155 new jobs to the city. They have obtained their certificate of occupancy for the building, and they are already working actively to prepare that building to begin operations there. Euro Pastry is a global company that manufactures, as you might imagine, pastries. Last month, we also gave second reading to a vacant building registration, which will aid the city in ensuring the safety of vacant buildings, but will also hopefully encourage us not to have as many vacant buildings. And so we'll be reaching out to the members of the community who are the owners of those buildings and encouraging them to register as the ordinance requires. One of the main factors of that ordinance is that it promotes public safety and helps law enforcement deal with issues of public safety. When we have vacant buildings sitting derelict and empty for years upon end, that encourages vagrants to use those buildings and sort of squat in them and do illegal things in those buildings. It's not good for the city. It's not good for the communities that surround them. And so it's important to note that while we have passed ordinances like the vacant building registration, we're also focusing on making sure that we have adequate law enforcement capability. Law enforcement capability in Lawrence has been significantly improved since the hiring of Chief Groundsel. Just since his hiring, the city has added 7 new officers to the police department staff. That brings us to the point where we are very nearly fully staffed for the first time in years. We've been able to do this by adjusting our compensation within the existing budget that was passed by council, just using our funds more wisely. And I have to give great credit to our city administrator and Chief Groundsel for working together on configuring those pay raises and other forms of compensation. but that's allowed us to improve our recruiting, and we are now a more attractive police department to work for. And hopefully that makes the city of Laurens a safer place to live and work. I do want to note, because it has been reported in the news, that, and I stated publicly in a report that I was angered by the break-in to Roma. It angers me that there would be any crime of that type in the city, but the folks at Roma are such dedicated citizens and have been strong supporters of this community in times where that wasn't such an easy thing to do. So the fact that somebody would do that to them is sickening. I can't comment on that pending criminal investigation, but I can tell you that our police are working hard on it, and we take law enforcement very seriously in the city, and we're dedicating the resources necessary to investigate that crime. On the lighter side, we have some fun events scheduled. We have Boo in the Park that's being sponsored by the Parks and Rec Department that is going to be taking place on October 31st. And we are also preparing for a Christmas market for the first time, at least to my knowledge, in the city's history. It will be positioned on the south side of the square. And that will begin the Friday after Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and continue throughout the Christmas season. My staff has been working very hard to locate local vendors for that Christmas market, so that rather than just buying a gift that you can get anywhere or order on Amazon, if you take part in this Christmas market, you can buy a locally made item, support your community, but also have something that's truly unique, and hopefully just have a good experience while you're out there. There'll be live music and refreshments and brass bands and all that sort of thing. Should be a good time. Tonight we're going to be giving special recognition to Brenton Wolf, who is donating land to the city of Laurens regarding in support of our efforts to establish the Swamp Rabbit Trail throughout the city. And I'll come back to that later, but we want to thank him and appreciate the efforts of so many people working together, both within city government, within the community, to establish a better quality of life. Things like that require all sorts of coordination, though, and so tonight we have a representative from SCDOT here, and we've met with them and working with them to plan for not only trails, but new bike lanes, transportation needs and upgrades in general throughout the city, sidewalk repairs, ADA repairs, all things that need to happen to improve the city, but require coordination with the Department of Transportation. I do want to say thank you to SCDOT for the conversations that we've had recently and the willingness to meet the needs of the city. Those are conversations that have been long overdue, and it's good to be working together as partners. Likewise, those plans fit into the city's overall comprehensive plan. Each year, or each decade or so, the city is required to develop a comprehensive plan that identifies the needs of the city and our plans for growth. And we're doing that in coordination with the county by using Studio Maine, who is a contractor, very skilled in doing this sort of work. And tonight I have the pleasure of introducing Blake Sanders from Studio Maine to speak to council for a moment about the comprehensive plan and our other discussions for improvements to the city. Mr. Sanders.
Mayor, council staff, thank you for allowing me to come and give you just a brief 60-minute presentation about the comprehensive plan. I'll be quick, I promise. So I'm Blake Sanders, President and Landscape Architect with Studio Maine, located in the upstate. We are planners and landscape architects that focus on communities less than 25,000 people and how to improve the quality of life. So I always tell everyone that there are 271 cities within the state. 200 of them are under 5,000 people. So the cores of downtown are kind of where that economic diversity lies at. So I want to talk to you just really quick about the comprehensive plan. It's a document that looks at the past, looks at your present conditions, and then gives council a vision for the future in regards to the safety, the health, and welfare of your citizens, residents, and constituents, and your businesses. What it is not a master plan of every parcel within inside of the city. So you may tell me as part of public input that you want 7 Chick-fil-A's in the city. I will not tell you where they will go. I will tell you you need to do a market analysis for fast food restaurants. So we're going to look at some high-level visioning as part of that. There are opportunities for public input meetings on November the 10th and November the 17th at various times in various locations throughout the city. The city will be distributing flyers via social media for that. There's also an online survey component of that. Hard copies will be available at City Hall, and those will be open through the end of the year. So after that, I'm going to be meeting with stakeholders, so SCDOT, to talk about road improvements, sidewalk improvements, those sort of things. There are 10 chapters that are required by the 1994 Planning Enabling Act that are required to be looked at, rewritten every 10 years, updated every 5 years, that range from housing, population, land use, and one of those is priority investments. And so Q1, Q2 of next year, I'll be bringing to you a list of priority investments and a draft comprehensive plan for you all to look through. This will be after kind of the steering committee goes through that. So that's economic development, CPW, city staff, and city elected officials. So super fun, 300-page document for you to sit on your bedside and read at night and mark pages in it. But it is truly a comprehensive document that should help guide the city for the next 10 years. So also working on other things within the city, such as your downtown streetscape and placemaking. So for your downtown, you've seen a lot of changes over the past decade for the better, in my opinion. You have new restaurants, new businesses. You have a strong downtown, and those pedestrian areas and perhaps some of those circulation areas they're ripe for improvements, and it's time for some of those improvements to take place. And so the things that we want to do is we want to prioritize ADA accessibility and safety. And so I encourage you just to kind of walk around in the lens of, and I don't like to speak about people that aren't able-bodied, but I like to think of it as far as my 80-year-old grandmother. So grab a walker and walk through downtown and see where the walker stubs up against perhaps a brick that has sunken in or a crosswalk that doesn't exist, and look at it from that angle. So we're going to be prioritizing those areas, replacement of those brick pavers, bringing those up to grade. We're going to be talking a lot about lighting and irrigation sleeves. We're also going to be looking at the addition of bulb outs or tree areas. And so if you were to become a bird or look out the window and you see some of those striped areas next to the parking, those may become landscape beds in the future for some additional canopy trees. Just looking at some of the historical photos as part of the past components of the comprehensive plan, there were some massive live oak trees that were in downtown, so we want to start to bring some of that tree canopy back. As part of that, we're going to be looking at tree health for the trees that are in your existing tree grates. So we're going to be looking at some of those cavities. Do they have strong central leaders? Do they need to be positioned somewhere else? Perhaps a bulb out can take the place of one of those tree grates. What that does is just expand your outdoor dining opportunities or additional pedestrian spaces. I always tell the story of there were 2 cities that selected street trees in the 80s. One of those was the city of Clemson, which chose crepe myrtles. The other was the city of Greenville, which chose massive live oaks. And one downtown is beautiful in tree canopy. One has a lot of leaf litter on the streets, and I'm a Clemson fan, but nonetheless, we still want to make sure that we're thinking about those trees for the next 30 years. We're working within those street metrics. So street metrics means your existing curb lines. So we're working within those metrics to not change a curb line, but add parking in downtown. So we're going to be adding some parallel spaces along East and West Public Square and East Lawrence Street. So we're going to have some positive parking numbers in downtown. And I'm also working with Lawrence County on the courthouse rehabilitations as part of Phase 2. The landscape and hardscape is included in that. So we're going to make sure that there's a marriage between your square and the courthouse as far as landscape and hardscape is concerned. So there's a lot of really cool things that I'm blessed to be a part of within the city of Lawrence. And the mayor has my contact information if you guys have any questions about the process or have any comments that you would like to give. I'm happy to receive those. And again, blessed to be here. So thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you.
Good report.
I believe that that brings me to the end of the report that I wanted to give. I know that was a lot to take in, but we've got a lot going on. So that brings us to the public comment portion. Do we have anyone sign up?
No, but can I just make a note that
Oh, sure.
a few months ago, we changed this portion after a recommendation from the municipal association for holding effective meetings, that we limit public input to items on the agenda. So just want to make that clear.
All right. Thank you. All right. Moving on to the consent agenda, we have two items, approval of the council agenda from our last meeting, or excuse me, for tonight, and approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Do I hear a motion concerning the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I call the question. All those in favor of approval of the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And the agenda is approved for tonight. All right, moving on to old business, we have second reading of ordinance 9-22-01, which is a 100% annexation petition for property lying along Highway 221 and Industrial Park Road. That petition is before you. As we discussed, this is sort of a thin sliver that lies along 221. This was approved on first reading unanimously. Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion, we approve ordinance 9-22-01 on second reading.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of approval on second reading of the 100% petition for annexation identified as ordinance 9-22-01, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And the ordinance is approved. All right, moving on to the second item of old business, we have second reading of 9-22-02, which is an ordinance to repeal Chapter 8 of the Code of Ordinances regulating amusements and entertainment in the city of Lawrence. As you may recall, this is the dreaded pinball ordinance, restricting the ability of minors to play pinball that for some reason is still on the books. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A motion and plenty of seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing no one wanting to discuss keeping such a thing around, I will call the question. All those in favor of repeal of Chapter 8 of the Code of Ordinances by ordinance 9-22-02, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And the kids can play pinball. All right, moving on to the third item, we have second reading of 9-22-03, an ordinance to repeal section 3857 of the Code of Ordinances, which regulates bus, hackney, and taxi cab stands within the city of Lawrence. Seeing as how we don't have any buses or hackney or taxi cabs, this may not be necessary, or at least that was the idea of the ordinance. Do I hear a motion?
So move, I'll make a motion.
We have a
Second reading.
motion and
We
a
approve
second.
reading.
Is there any discussion?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, I noticed where the county, have taxicab, and they're allowed to come into the city. And I received a telephone call that was very disturbing about that. This young lady lives on River Street. She worked at Bojangles, and he charged her $15 one way.
Well, I'm glad you raised that point. This ordinance does not relieve anybody doing business in the city of Lawrence of the responsibility to obtain a business license in the city of Lawrence. And if somebody is conducting business illegally or doing something which would violate state law regarding unfair business practices, this does not. The repeal of a requirement to only be able to go to a taxi cab stand to get a taxi does not affect that.
Okay, so therefore, they do not have to have, I won't say it, do not have to have business license to operate in the city.
They do.
They do, okay. That's the emphasis that I want to put on that. So they do, they should, do we have in it that have been listed? Do you know of?
Counselor, that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Part of the intent behind my wanting to introduce this is because unless and until we have a public transportation system, which frankly we can't afford, I think it would be a good thing to encourage sort of a private alternative where if somebody wanted to become an Uber or a Lyft driver and provide rides, we're making it easier for them to do that.
Okay.
That certainly is a need. What this does is clear the way for that kind of thing to be able to happen because they don't have to operate a physical taxi stand. But on the other hand, it doesn't, it also would encourage competition because if more people are doing that, it would be less likely that somebody would be able to gouge somebody by charging exorbitant rates because they're the only game in town.
That was my concern, because she called me twice, and I told her that I would bring it up. I didn't know, I knew we had this ordinance, but I didn't know exactly what it all entails, so I wanted clarity. So thank you.
It's a good, it's a valid concern. I'm glad you brought that to the council's attention. Any other questions regarding 92203? Thank you, Councilor Miller, for raising that point. If there is no further discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor of passage of ordinance 92203 on second reading, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And the measure passes unanimously. Moving on to the fourth item on the agenda, we have second reading of 92204, which is an ordinance to repeal section 6.2 of the Code of Ordinances, which regulates Sunday sales of alcoholic beverages within the city. As council is aware from our discussion at last month's meeting, the county passed had a countywide referendum which approved Sunday alcohol sales, which rendered the city's regulation moot. And so we're just presenting this to council to repeal what is now unenforceable. So do I hear a motion concerning?
I make the motion we approve ordinance 92204.
Thank you, Councilor Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
A second. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
This just approved what we've done over the years anyway to authorize for sales where we used to renew it every 6 months. And so this just gives us authority to go ahead and
That,
and we won't have to do it every 6 months.
that's correct, Counselor. That's a good way of putting it, is, previously, council voted every 6 months to suspend enforcement of this anyway.
Yeah.
And so this just takes it off the books.
Also, we won't do this again.
Correct. This is the last time we'll have to talk about it. Lord willing. Last time we'll have to talk about this. Any further discussion? All right, I will call the question. All those in favor of passage of ordinance 9-22-04 on second reading, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And the ordinance is passed unanimously. All right, now, moving on to ordinance 9-2205, which is similar to what we just discussed, but an ordinance to repeal Chapter 42 of the Code of Ordinances, specifically regulating vehicles for hire within the city of Lawrence. This is presented as two separate ordinances and two separate agenda items because there are two separate portions within the city code that dealt with the exact same thing. Well, similar subject matter, specifically vehicles for hire. So this completes the job of the ordinance that we just voted on. So are there any motions concerning 9-2205? Not everybody at once now.
I'll make a motion so we can bring it up for discussion that we go ahead and approve 9-2205 because we've had, this is the second reading, so this gives us a chance to discuss it if you get a second.
Thank you, Counselor. We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Let's discuss. So, who has questions about repeal of Chapter 42 that I can deflect to the city attorney?
What's different in the first one to this one?
Sorry, I don't understand what's different from the other ordinance and this ordinance. The last ordinance talked about regulating where taxi stands could be. So apparently you don't have any of those in the city. So that's what that one had to do with. This one, in looking at it right here, deals with taxi cabs in general. It does talk about licenses. It does talk about public liability, insurance carrying, and so forth and so on. I believe now you do that with your business license for them. So therefore, because you have a different process in place that licenses businesses, this renders this moot because this was just for taxi cabs alone. There's a different process that now regulates business license. So you have kind of duplicate regulations and rules that are going on one industry. Does that make sense? And so you have to remove one of them so that they're not trying to comply with two competing sets of regulations.
How many regulations is allowed?
Whatever's in your business license ordinance is one whole setup, and then this had several different things. It talked about registry numbers, insurance liability they had to carry, their separate licensing under there, if you could revoke their licenses, that stuff DMV would handle now. The business license is taking care of how much they have to pay, register, make sure they're on file, et cetera. So you've got just competing. There were several things that were down for taxi cabs, but they're duplicated over in your business licenses as well. Maybe not word for word and exactly, but for the most part, they're duplicate. But you're kind of picking on one industry here with having its own set of regulations that go along with the business license as well. So you could be said to be discriminating against them if they're having a lot more that they have to comply with. The DMV's already regulating them, and you've got business licenses regulating them, and then we had a whole separate set of ordinances that was doing that as well.
Sound like you consolidate.
Pretty much, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I got you. So is this ordinance going away too?
Yes, ma'am, this would repeal that,
Oh,
all of that,
okay.
that entire section with taxi cabs, yes, ma'am, so that it's moving them completely to business licenses, and then whatever DMV regulates for motor vehicle and motor carriers. Yes, ma'am.
Council, it's my understanding that this was originally passed, I believe in the 50s. That well predates anything that we would have been doing in terms of business licenses. And of course, the needs and challenges of the 50s were different. As City Attorney said, in many ways, this is duplicative, but it's also, by repealing this, we allow companies like Uber and Lyft that have their own qualifications for drivers to use those qualifications. They've sort of done the vetting for us. So hopefully this does what we can from the city's perspective to clear out of the way and allow individuals in the community to be able to be entrepreneurs and earn some money.
Take a lot of our shoulders too.
That's right.
That's good. Liability, yeah.
Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of approval of ordinance 9-22-05, repealing chapter 2 of our Code of Ordinances on second reading, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. And that ordinance is passed unanimously. All righty, that takes care of old business. And we will move quickly on to the first item of new business. The first, we'll begin with two resolutions. The first is Resolution 22-10-01, which is a resolution to reduce annual premiums. The South Carolina Municipal Insurance Trust and South Carolina Municipal Insurance and Risk Financing Fund have deductible options that cities can choose. And by choosing our annual deductible, we can save anywhere between $5,000 and $7,000 over the course of 5 years, but every little bit counts. Eric has done a fine job of looking at our needs in years past, and we feel like we've arrived at a good number, but this resolution allows us to actually do that. So do we hear a motion concerning this resolution?
I make the motion that resolution 22-10-01 be adopted and approved. You have that first reading?
Thank you, Council. You hit it dead on. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Thank you, Councilor Sullivan. Is there any discussion?
So what's the amount of the deductible?
I believe $5,000 is,
I believe the sweet spot is about 2,500. So that would be about a savings of $5,000 over a 5-year period. We could also opt and just have the $5,000 deductible, and that would be about $7,000. So it's just, just a little balance there.
What's the deductible now?
It's $1,000. Just the lower you go, the less savings there.
Sure.
But the coverage is unchanged, right?
Right.
Okay.
And is this, for the employees or?
this would be if we had some incident that required insurance to cover.
And what about the premium?
It would lower the premium over the, 5 years. We have a little bit of savings. That's basically what this is doing,
Okay,
with the cost savings.
all right.
So, passing this resolution, we need to determine the deductible amount, or we leaving that up to our administrator?
I think it could be left to the administrator to do the math. I would sort of suggest that council grant him that authority, but I will defer. I think anything in that range, though, I mean, we're talking about we have a slightly higher deductible at 5,000, we're saving roughly $7,000 versus 5,000, but slightly lower deductible. The deductible, well, it could, but I think based upon sort of our historic need for insurance coverage, you're sort of balancing the likelihood of having to pay it out and how often you would have to pay it out and what that would cost.
Just speaking with the risk analysis expert at the municipal association, about that $5,000 to $2,500 deductible, that'd be the sweet spot for the city of Lawrence. That's what they recommend, we stay somewhere in between that.
Eric, let me ask this, would it be either or either $2,500 or $5,000? Does that answer your question, Counselor?
It does. I think we should leave it up to the administrator to make that decision. I think that's a decision he can make. I think he's more in tune with what it needs to be than we are. So I'll leave it there.
May I suggest we have a question before council, but I would entertain a motion to the effect of allow, as a sub-motion, to allow the councilor to determine that final amount.
I'll make a motion to amend or offer an amendment acceptable to whoever made the original motion to allow for
Miss-
the administrator to make the decisions on this matter.
Ms. Miller, would you have any, I believe it's Ms. Miller that made the motion. Would you be agreeable to an amendment to amend your motion to allow council to pass this and grant the city administrator authority to determine that final amount? All right. That motion is therefore amended. Is there a second to the amended motion of Ms. Miller?
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of passage of Resolution 22-10-01 on, well, a passage period, because it only requires one reading, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? No. And the resolution is passed. Thank you. Moving on to something more fun. We have a resolution before us tonight to acknowledge a land donation to the city of Lawrence. Mr. Breton Wolf owned a tract of land on East Main between the Lawrence Hotel and what was formerly Spratt Groceries and Todd Distributors. We have identified that spot as sort of a necessary piece of the puzzle to be able to bring the Swamp Rabbit Trail down to Little River Park, because the alternative would be to have the trail come across the railroad tracks on East Main. By bringing this alongside the Lawrence Hotel and onto New Street and Gordon Street down to Little River Park. New Street and Gordon Street are city streets that we already own. We're able to allow people to go underneath the railroad trestle instead of having to go over the railroad tracks. And we're very happy to announce and acknowledge publicly that Mr. Wolf has agreed to donate the tract to the city, and the city will in turn use that to develop the Swamp Rabbit Trail. So I want to publicly acknowledge that donation, that very generous donation, and your support for your community. And so I present that ordinance or that resolution to council tonight and ask that we pass that resolution acknowledging and thank you, Mr. Wolf. Do I hear a motion and a second so we can have some discussion?
I make a motion that we adopt with, resolution 2210-02.
Thank you, Councilor Lattimore. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I invite council to discuss all they want.
Now, now,
Stay in the swamp land the trail, right through Vaughn, it started, I know where it started, but, I'm excited about that, because that's not too far.
so it will come down from where and go across to Gordon Street to go under the trestle? How, I can't picture the exact.
So, at this point, the plan is for us to use, it's hard for me to describe the whole path, but we would use CPW rights of way. We've already met with the commissioners, I believe it was last year, may have been a year and a half ago now. And the commissioners were kind enough to give the city to use their rights of way to build portions of the trail throughout the city. That would bring us to Caroline Street and South Street, running behind the square, across 221. South Street continues through the property which is adjacent to Carolina Milling, which is an important piece. Then it sort of comes out right across from the Lawrence Hotel and the old Todd Distributors building. And so at that juncture, the choice is either do we hang a right and have, daddies with strollers pushing the stroller across the railroad tracks, or do we have them using a nice crosswalk and using a tree-lined trail? And so Mr. Wolf's generous donation makes it possible to use the latter alternative. Mr. Wolf, would you stand up and be recognized? Thank you. Is there any further discussion or questions about that? We're working hard to put all these pieces in place. That was sort of one of the last big dominoes that needed to fall. As you may know, the building beside it, the Todd Distributors, is currently under contract as well. So the whole area is seeing tremendous improvement. It always makes me happy when people talk about the things that we're working together to do downtown, but there's a whole lot we're working on that's not downtown. And this is just one of those examples of how the city as a whole is improving. So I will call the question. All those in favor of passage of Resolution 22-1002, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, no. And we thank you unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight as well. It's our pleasure to have you. All righty. Moving on to the third item of new business, we have Ordinance 10-22-01, which is an ordinance approving a bond which would be taken out by CPW to complete the substation that I mentioned in my remarks previously. This will not affect the city's bonding capacity, but because the Commissioner of Public Works was created by City Council and we have an oversight role to their bonding, we must pass an ordinance to allow them to proceed with bonding out this new electrical substation to supply the industries at Hunter Industrial Park and to provide additional capacity and reduce the likelihood of power outages across the city as a whole. So this will be a supplement to the Mill Street substation. All right. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Mr. Commissioner, it sounds like everybody's on board, so I will call the question. All those in favor of passage of ordinance 10-22-01, which is approval of a supplemental bond ordinance for the Commission of Public Works, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And the measure is approved. Moving on to our next item. We have ordinance 10-22-02, which is an ordinance authorizing the city to dispose of a portion of real property to Lawrence County. As council is aware, there was a capital sales tax referendum that approved the expansion of the EMS facilities owned by the county, and the EMS facility along Exchange Drive borders property that is currently owned by the city. There's a tiny sliver of that parcel that would be needed for the county to expand their project that is of no particular value to the city, but it would allow them to square up their parcel and proceed with that project. But of course, because it is disposing of city property, I can't do that without your approval. So we're presenting this ordinance to allow us to cooperate with the county in expanding our EMS facilities. Do I hear a motion concerning ordinance 10-22-02?
So move. I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 10-22-02.
Thank you, Counselor Bolt. Is there a second? Thank you, Counselor Miller. Is there any discussion? Sounds like yes.
I will,
She beat you to it.
she did beat me to it.
Where are they currently?
Well, they're not in that building.
I think
Are
they
there?
moved to several different substations right now.
Yeah.
Because I think they're manning some of them outside the county. So I rode by several of them, and they people in those substations outside the county.
So they're in the county, not in the city now?
Am I mistaken in saying that it have a
Yeah,
location at Church Street?
Well, I think they,
Okay, that's okay, we'll
yeah,
find out.
yeah, I think there's some still located out, even out at the hospital and, you know, in some of the other areas, urgent care and some of the other places they're located throughout, I think.
All right.
I have a hard enough time keeping up with what we're doing in the city. It's hard for me to keep track of the county.
That piece of property is vacant, and it does look kind of vacant like it is.
Soon to begin some construction, I believe.
I will be abstaining. I have possible conflict involved with the project.
Thank you for announcing that conflict.
Are we able to discuss maybe what they plans for that building, or is it just not known at this time?
Those plans were detailed in the capital sales tax proposal. My recollection from that is that it adds some sort of bunk facilities, and I believe some additional garage space.
Yeah, it's a total renovation, basically.
Yeah, it's
Gut job.
it's woefully inadequate, small facility. So really, we play a very minor part in this, but we're trying to be team players by
I understand that.
helping them square it up. Any further discussion? All right. Hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of passage on first reading of ordinance 10-22-02, which authorizes the city to dispose of real property to Lawrence County, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. And the measure is approved on first reading unanimously. Item 5 concerning 100% petition ordinance for annexation regarding property along South Harper Street. I would ask that we table that, given the fact that we have received communication from the owner that was submitting the petition that is asking to hold off on that. So I would entertain a motion to table that at this time.
Make a motion that we table 10/22/04.
Thank you, Counselor. Is there a second? Motion and second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none without opposition. All those in favor of tabling 10/22/04 indicate saying aye.
Aye.
And the motion is tabled, or the measure is tabled. All righty. That brings us to the end of tonight's very full, very productive, very positive agenda. And I now turn to our Mayor Pro Tem. And we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.